I want to get to what's happening in the war in Gaza, because there's been a lot of developments, a lot of movement over there. They have continued to find the bodies of hostages, they being Hamas, and turn them over just in ones and twos and threes. So we're down now to the point where there are a grand total of 8 hostage bodies still in Gaza. The last time we talked about this, it was 13. So there, like I said, it's been some significant movement. The interesting thing is that many of these bodies have been found behind the yellow line in areas that Israel controls. And they're not being found by Israel. They're being found by armed Hamas members. And so that kind of makes you go like, huh, wait, what? Is it Israel is allowing armed Hamas members to come into the yellow zone that they control to search for bodies? I thought Hamas was supposed to disarm. And the only thing I can figure from that is that Hamas is accompanying the Red Cross in their vehicles. And so the IDF is like hands off the Red Cross. So obviously, they're not going to light up the Red Cross. They're not going to bomb their vehicles or anything like that. So Hamas is taking advantage of that to get armed men into the yellow zone. Now, there, as far as I know, have not been any instances of those armed Hamas fighters attacking the IDF while they're there looking for bodies. But there have been other Hamas members who have attacked the IDF on multiple occasions over the last few days. And it is definitely a ceasefire violation on the part of Hamas to shoot at IDF soldiers, try to blow them up with IEDs, hit them with RPGs, things like that. There have been at least 3 IDF soldiers that have died since the ceasefire took effect in firefights with Hamas. So Hamas continues to break the ceasefire. Israel will respond and neutralize the threat, but they have not gone much further than that, even though they now know that there are at least 200 Hamas fighters who are trapped in tunnels inside the yellow zone. And for them to come out of those tunnels would mean giving themselves up to the IDF, and they're not willing to do that. So what they've done is they've reached out to the mediators and asked for them to negotiate some sort of amnesty for these guys where, okay, we'll look the other way while you come out of your tunnels and make your way into the areas that Hamas still controls in Gaza. And Israel has said, yeah, no, that's not a good idea. Our objective is to annihilate Hamas and to disarm them and remove them from power. So we're not going to just let 200 Hamas terrorists come waltzing out of a tunnel in areas we control and go unmolested into the areas we don't control so that they can continue to fight us when we have to go back in there. Israel is still planning on going in and disarming Hamas. Israel has continued to find weapons being smuggled into Gaza, or at least attempting to be smuggled into Gaza, by way of drones coming from Egypt and some from Jordan. So these drones are octocopters. They're probably the size of a coffee table, and they can hold quite a bit of weight. And they're flying them over the border into the desert of the Negev in Israel, or trying to fly them directly into Gaza. And Israel is shooting them down. And these things have, each one of them might have a half a dozen assault rifles, a bunch of pistols, some explosives, grenades, things like that on these drones. The concerning thing is that just looking at the numbers, they're shooting these down almost every day. But the reason that it doesn't fill me with confidence is because if they're continuing to try to send these in there, it's obvious that some of them at least are getting through. And typically in a situation like this, you would have some fairly small percentage of the total that gets seen and shot down, engaged and shot down. It's not 100%. So there are elements outside of Gaza, outside of Israel, who are actively engaging in what I would call acts of war against Israel by trying to rearm and refit Hezbollah and the extremists that live in Judea and Samaria and that area. Israel for years has been picking up just truckloads of weapons coming across the border from Jordan. It wouldn't be anything to go out there in the middle of the night and have a group of guys that comes up from the Jordanian side, sneaks up to the fence and lobs a bunch of packages with weapons, explosives, whatever, drugs over that fence and have it picked up by some Palestinians on the other side. There are quite a few areas along the border with Jordan that are Palestinian areas. They're B zones and even some A zones. Jericho is an A zone right there on the border, further north up toward the Sea of Tiberias. And there are several that you go through B zones on the way with lots of Palestinian farmers and stuff right up to the fence. So smuggling continues to be a serious issue that Israel is having to deal with. The more concerning thing are the explosives and RPGs and rifles and things like that, because those end up getting used in terror attacks against Israelis. That's going to be an ongoing problem. Now, Israel has worked to start building a more substantial fence along its border with Jordan. There are places, if you go down in the south near Eilat, right where the airport in Eilat is, where the fence is probably 40 feet high, or if not more. It's one of the tallest fences I've ever seen in my life. And that's because the airport is so close to the border that airplanes coming in and taking off from Eilat were coming under ground fire from the Jordanian side. So they put this gigantic fence up to block the view until these planes could get out far enough away. That's insane. We have not heard much out of the Houthis lately. They've been largely quiet since the ceasefire in Gaza. And I guess they're just waiting and biding their time to see what happens. Israel says they're still going to have to deal with the Houthis at some point. They're also going to have to deal with Hezbollah in the north. So if we shift up north, the Israelis have been continuing to strike every single day inside Lebanon. They're taking out Hezbollah commanders. These are people, they know who they are. And they're surgical strikes. They'll take out one car, one motorcycle, that sort of thing. And they're not carpet bombing or just randomly shelling the area or anything like that. However, their patience is running thin. And again, they claim that they're not breaking any ceasefire because they're just simply responding to the tenets of the ceasefire, which require Hezbollah to stay north of the Litani River. So stay out of that southern part of Lebanon, right up against the border with Israel. And they see Hezbollah trying to reestablish a footprint in that area, and they're just thwarting them every chance they get. Now, that's getting a little more complicated because there are now like 19,000 Lebanese troops in the south of the Litani River. These are Lebanese soldiers, not Hezbollah, although in the past, there has been a pretty close connection between a good portion of those soldiers and Hezbollah. What I mean is it might be a soldier in the Lebanese army, but they might have an uncle or a brother or a cousin or a father who's also a fighter for Hezbollah. And at the beginning of the war, there were some indicators that even some of the Lebanese soldiers themselves were actually Hezbollah fighters moonlighting as Hezbollah fighters at night. The U.S. sent a message to the president of Lebanon, who's a Christian, by the way, Maronite Christian, and said, look, you guys are dragging your feet. Your job is to disarm Hezbollah. We've given you cover to do that politically. We've given you lots of assets militarily to do that, and you're not doing it fast enough. They've made some token seizures of Hezbollah weapons and things like that. But Hezbollah is saying, we're not going to turn over our weapons. So that makes you think it's likely that Israel will have to go back into Lebanon. Now, the president of Lebanon said something yesterday, which is a little concerning. And what he said was, I have given direction to the Lebanese troops that are along the border with Israel to shoot down any Israeli drones that they see in the sky. And his reasoning was because we're afraid they're going to bomb olive farmers as they harvest their olives. Now, I think Israel has good enough visual intelligence from those drones that they have flying overhead to tell the difference between a farmer that's plucking olives off a tree and a guy who's setting up a rocket array or something like that. So I don't think that's that much of an issue. And that's why it's concerning, because if the Lebanese president is running cover in this way and saying, yeah, we're going to shoot down Israeli drones over our territory, and he's made some other noises about Lebanese sovereignty and we need to get the Israelis out. They still control a tremendous amount of territory inside Lebanon and so on and so forth. And there still are troops in Lebanon, IDF troops. It's a little concerning because it's pushback. It's not, hey, we want to work with the Israelis to rid our country of the cancer of Hezbollah. And so we're going to work hand in hand with them along the border and all the way up to the Litani River to root out any Hezbollah stragglers or leave behinds or any underground tunnels, headquarters elements, bunkers, anything, arms caches. We're going to help the Israelis find and destroy all of those things and get rid of Hezbollah once and for all. But that's not what he's saying. Now he's pushing back on Israel and saying, you guys are meddling in our country far too much. And he still says the right things in terms of getting rid of the scourge of Hezbollah. The time for Hezbollah is over in Lebanon, things like that. But actions speak louder than words. And if you got 19,000 troops south of the Litani River and you're not helping the Israelis when it comes to taking out Hezbollah, what it tells me is that you're either afraid of them or you're in cahoots with them, both of which are bad. Now, I also wanted to move over to Iran. The leadership of the Khamenei regime put out a statement yesterday saying our troops are now more capable and more ready for war than they were during the beginning of the 12-day war with Israel. And if it comes down to it, we will see an even larger defeat of the enemy than we saw last time. Now, taking into account that, by all accounts, Israel won the 12-day war hands down. It doesn't mean that they didn't sustain any damage, but in terms of capabilities, in terms of economic damage, in terms of reputational damage, everything, Israel just cleaned the floor with Iran last time. And Iran saying, we're ready for an even bigger defeat, because that they called that a defeat of the enemy. They called that a victory, which is typical for Muslim extremists. So apparently, Pete Hegseth had a phone call with the prime minister of Iraq a couple days ago. And Hegseth didn't say anything about that call, but the prime minister of Iraq leaked what they talked about and said that Hegseth was very aggressive and told him there are about to be some strikes in Iraq in the very near future. And the Iranian-backed militias that are under the table support from the Iraqi government had better not intervene. Now, he could have been talking about strikes that are going to be taking place in Syria, although we have precious few troops in Syria at this point, just a couple hundred left. We're also drawing down our forces in Iraq itself. A lot of people forget that we still have thousands of troops in Iraq. There are still at least 2 military bases in Iraq that have U.S. troops on them. Most of them are in the area that's called Kurdistan in northern Iraq. Actually, one of them is. The other one is not. The other one's, I think, in Anbar province. Nevertheless, what are those guys doing? They're there to try to keep a lid on the Islamic State, because ISIS was never actually defeated. There's still tens of thousands of people who are partial to ISIS in that region. So the United States keeps troops there. We collect intelligence. We assist the Iraqi government if they're going to go after them. We assist the Kurdish government if they're going to go after ISIS. But sometimes we just unilaterally go after ISIS ourselves and send in the Rangers to unalive somebody and make their tummy hurt, have a really bad day. And that's been going on for years. But the United States has now drawn down its forces in Iraq by about 500 troops. So they're slowly shifting people away from there. If the overt goal is to keep a lid on ISIS, the covert goal of having U.S. troops there is more to keep an eye on the Iraqi government and keep the Iranians from getting a stronger foothold in Iraq, because the Iranians have been for a long time trying to control the Iraqi government, and they've been pretty successful to a large extent. The Iraqi government is Shia, and the Iranians are Shia, and so they work on just having some influence in Iraq quite a bit.